So if we want to do checkboxes down the left-hand side, let's say, we check the box and then we check 3 of them and then hit delete for all 3 of them, right? Instead of clicking one at a time. So to do that, we'd have to add another column. And then in here, in the column, we would have to create a checkbox. So I'm going to use my HTML helper. I'm going to do a checkbox for. And I want to add a property called isSelected. Now isSelected is part of, actually wait, this isn't model, it's user. There we go. Because it's one instance of my model. Now, people look at this and they go, why is it model arrow user? Right? Because we kept doing model arrow model. The reason is that the model is a list of our users. So if we actually just follow the model arrow model convention, it'll tell you in the IntelliSense that that model is a list of user manager view model. So if we hit dot, we get all of those link type expression functions, all those extension methods that allow us to do things like add, do any, as enumerable, where, select, all of that stuff. It all gives us those options for the entire collection of users. What we want is, frankly, we want to ignore the model and work with the data we have. So instead, we do user, which is coming from our for each loop, dot isSelected. Now the catch here is isSelected is not a property. So we have to go back and manage and edit our view model and do all of those things. Or Visual Studio is smart enough to say, hey, you didn't have a property called isSelected. Did you mean to make one? If you want, you click this link and I'll generate the property for you inside of your user manager view model. So you don't have to jump back to your class and add that property. It'll even try so hard as it will attempt to generate it generate the correct data type for that property based on the context. So it'll look at the context and say, oh, I think this is a 50-50 shot. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. In this case, it guessed correctly, so isSelected as a Boolean. I typed isSelected, and then it gives me the little accelerator, that little purple box underneath the variable. If you click on it, it'll give you an option to generate the property. It give you that? Are you still in debug mode? Do you need to stop? Yeah, that'll do it too. Make sure you stop before you start to do that. Did it give it to you now? Yep. All right. So I now have this property. So save, F6, I got to rebuild because I actually changed my code even though I didn't go there. And I apparently closed Chrome, so let me relaunch. All right, so now we have our checkboxes down the side. And then we need to add a button to actually do like the bulk delete. So we'll add it up here. To save myself a little bit of time. Actually, that won't save me any time. Using HTML begin form. And then I'll do button type submit value delete. delete selected. So save, refresh. Oh, that doesn't look good at all. So the objective here is that we check the boxes and hit the button. So this is happening as part of a form submit. So what we have to do is we have to package up that content and ship it back. And what will happen is if we do a submit, let me actually jump back to my controller first. I'm going to add a action result that receives a list of user manager view model. I'll just call it results. I'll do my post. And then that's what I want to do here, return view. And I'm not really interested in returning a view, I just want to put a breakpoint there and then inspect what I'm getting. So let me attach my debugger to IIS Express. Let me refresh my page. And I'll just check 2. And hit delete selected. Let me try rebuilding. Rebuild. Refresh. Attach my debugger. There we go. And hit delete. So the goal is I would get back part of my collection. My results are null. The reason for that is that we did not construct our view in the right way so that the model binder understood what to do with the data that came back. Basically, what ended up coming back was 2 checkboxes, both called isSelected. They both have the exact same name, so it basically assumed they were the same. And then it looked for a property called isSelected, just like we did the whole spaghetti thing. And it couldn't find one. So it basically gave up and said, well, I can't create a collection of isSelected because I only have one. I don't know what the difference is, and isSelected is not one of my properties or one of my parameters. So we have to give the model binder some help. And the thing you often run into with the model binder is that it does not like data being posted back to it that was constructed using a for each loop. It really likes for loops. And the reason, and that's the object reference for the other thing, so that's okay. The reason is if we look at the properties of this checkbox, which is a form control, it's an input control, the box name is user.isSelected. It doesn't say the first user that is selected, the second user. We don't have any identifying characteristics. It just says it's a user. So if we change our for each loop to be a for loop, and then we change this to be model I dot is selected, and then to make it ease of compatibility, I'll paste this in here and say model I. So I'm creating a local variable called user for all of our other text that we're just spitting out on the screen, because I don't really care about that. It's just, I'm just writing content out to the screen. But what I do care about is which model am I dealing with in the collection, and then I want its is selected property. And I want those to be unique because I'm expecting unique results to come back as a collection. Does that make a little bit of sense? All right. So if I just refresh without rebuilding, then you'll see now that it changed the name. The name is square bracket 0 close square bracket dot is selected. It's basically going to tell the model binder, this is item 0 in the list. This is item 1 in the list. It's helping MVC to understand that these are unique. So when the data gets sent back to the server, it doesn't just assume it's one user object. It knows that there is a collection being sent back. So if we flip back here, check two boxes, and make sure my debug is attached. That's not it. And I hit delete. Well, now I have a result count of 4. And there's 4 user manager view models in there. If I look at the first one, is selected as true. I check that box. Is selected as true on the second one. I check that box. Is selected as false on the third one because I did not check that box. And guess what the fourth one is? It's false as well. So we now are able to almost uniquely identify each one. The catch is, do you know which one is 0, 1, 2, and 3? You don't. Well, you kind of do because they're in there from order of entry. But if I went and sorted it alphabetically, you'd have no idea which one was which. So we need to add one more element to our view so that we actually have the ID and then whether it's selected or not. So let's stop. Go back to our view. And then typically I like to just kind of tuck this into the same column as my checkbox. It's completely up to you. If you have a preference or a particular way you want to do it, that's fine. HTML.hidden4 so model I dot ID. And all that's going to do for you is it creates a hidden input element. Open caret input type hidden value, whatever the ID is. It's basically storing it in there so that on post back we get the ID and the checkbox value. So if you look at the code now, no, not that code. Right above it, we have that hidden, and the value of that hidden is the ID, in this case 1. You'll notice that it follows that same notation for the name, square bracket, index identifier, dot, and the property name. So if I check 1 and 4 this time, attach my debugger, hit delete, and look at my results. ID 1 is true, 2 is false, 3 is false, 4 is true. So now I can loop through those results and know which ones to delete. Cool. So using that for loop versus the for each loop has a lot of power. It really depends on what you're trying to accomplish. If you're doing just straight data output, you're just printing stuff out on the screen, for each loop is great. Less code, more direct, easier to read. If you're doing single line actions, like putting a delete button on each row, again, for each loop is fine for that. You just need to make sure you have that ID. You do the URL action, you point it to the action, include the ID, it does what it needs to do. When you do bulk actions, like checkboxes, in doing groups deletions or any other action you're doing in bulk, even data entry. If you said, type in 10 users, give me 10 users, bulk entry. Give them a first name field, a username field, a last name field, an email field, and a password field. And you just go through and key them all in instead of doing one at a time. You would have to do the same model of, you have to create an empty array of 10, pass it to the view, bind it to a text box, doing a for loop, and then that would give you a grid of text boxes for each user. And then on submit, you would get back an array of new user accounts to create. Okay? So the for loop is very important when you're doing this type of data binding.